Hello, I'm in the garage. It's a hot sunny day here in England and my noisy neighbours are out barbecuing, playing loud music, and the dog is howling, so that's going to interfere with the recording. However, since I'm a wargamer, I'm in the garage because it's sunny outside. I have to stay out of the sun and do something quiet and interesting in the garage. Now I'm rambling on. So what am I doing? I'm building these terrain pieces, so they're tiles essentially, to drop on top of a terrain layout or a mat. They're made of cork. I'll get it close in, and here's a sheet of cork. You can see the thickness of it and how flexible it is as a piece of cork. And that's what's being used as the base for these. And I wanted to keep them thin. I'm getting increasingly annoyed with plyboard and MDF, the medium density fiberboard, warping in the garage or just with any moisture. And cork's good at not warping. It'll conform to a layout a little bit. So if you had a slightly lumpy layout, you drop it on and it'll lie flat. You still get, when you glue things on, some edges sort of lifting a little bit, which you can't really help. But generally speaking, they're staying pretty flat when I'm gluing things on top of them. So these are very much a work in progress, and that's not a snow effect, that's actually polyfiller I've used on there. I shall grab from my layout area the polyfiller to show you this. It's a tub, no sanding polyfiller. In fact, I do sand it down though. And that's gone on building up around the other areas of cork and what have you that's on those sections. I use different grades of gravel. I use some cork chunks, that's what's in the middle there, natural cork chunks. And that's going to be like a rock face, well, not a rock face, but an exposed granite rock piece on the ground. And just to explain them a bit more in detail, maybe I can reverse this camera and talk through it. No, I can't, so I'll just show and tell. So in the game Warmachine, the control zones are meant to have they're not meant to be rough terrain, they're not meant to be obstructive in any way. And of course I've broken that rule with this board here, because I've put a kind of gravestone thing, a tomb in the middle. However, I want these terrain pieces to be flexible, so depending on the game, if I'm using that as a control zone, I will classify the whole area as open terrain. And because I haven't got massive things obstructing it, you can pretty much move the figures anywhere on it. Likewise with this piece, even though I've used, I think this was from the Games Workshop Hobbit game, a terrain piece. If I'm using this in a Warmachine game where I'm just wanting to have that as a control zone, the whole slab, I'll make sure that it's classified as just open ground, and even that won't count as a wall. Okay, it will get in the way a little bit of models, but you can pop them on top of it and ignore it. And then if I'm using this layout, using these on a layout where I'm not worried about there being terrain obscuring things, I could use it as a wall. You know, if I was playing a Solid Blades of Heroes type game, we'll use it as an obstruction and people could hide behind it. The other thing that's on there, which you can see, because this is a later stage of the construction, is some of this tile work. This is from Games Workshop. It's quite an expensive pack, I think sort of £20 or $20, but you get 6 or so sheets like this of this plastic groundwork essentially, because it has the usual sort of Games Workshop iconography on it. However, once disguised under the piece, and if you build it in, okay, it looks like it's kind of a natural section. So I've almost obscured the skull by using filler and then sanding over it. And also I've made sure the polyfiller is flush with the edge of it, so it's not sort of outstanding. You can see another section there hidden. That's a different tile piece that has a sort of a flame symbol on it. And you can see again, one of the key things to do, let me just show you one of my gravel boxes. Different grades of gravel on there. Well, what I wanted to show you was these pieces here. These are some more Games Workshop sections from the Hobbit game, I think they were from. But you can see again, they have a sort of a lip on them around the edge. And you get that raised lip on all of their sort of pieces that are injection moulded plastic like that. And the important thing to do with that is to try and make it as flush as possible. So you can see with that tomb in the middle there, it did have around the edges here a raised lip, and I've built up to it with polyfiller, put some little gravel granules, cork granules on there to make it look like it's all integrated. Once painted and done, it'll look like it's flush and part of the terrain rather than being proud of the base, which is what you don't want. So how did I do it? Well, I used a hot glue gun to glue on the main pieces. I also use a lot of this stuff, which is called Mod Podge. I use the matte type. It's available in all good hobby and craft stores, and that provides me an easy method of gluing on the large stones, bits of gravel, etc. So you can see these larger pieces here. Those are real bits of flattened stone I've put on there. And if you look at this piece, you can see I've used more of that flattened stone. In fact, that one there has even got some sort of mineral life form deposits in the rock, some kind of fossilized stuff, which only adds to the sort of layout really. And on this one I've also used these sections of bits of old wood. I think I got them off from a beach or something. I cracked them up. It's all weather worn wood. I tend to just get stuck in on these, so don't spend hours and hours planning. What I'll do is I'll just have something in mind and then I'll throw it down and then go for it. So this one, as I was saying, it's going to be a Warmachine templated layout area. However, it could also be used as a piece of rough ground in the game. So it could either be dropped on as a decent terrain piece, or just say, oh, that's a rough ground area, or a zone. And what I'm going to do, my aim with it, is to sort of make it look sort of boggy through the middle underneath there. So there'll be a water style stuff poured in, and also along the edge here some watery bits, and then out wherever there's a crack I'll put some water on there, some of the scenic effects water. Obviously only when it's all completely painted. This is the bare natural cork at the moment. And that'll look like someone's put down the wood to make a passage through a boggy section of ground, and however the whole area could be treated as rough terrain in any sort of game, or just as a feature. But as a control zone in the game, it'll just be open terrain, it'll be treated as, but just as an interesting feature. I like the idea that if you're playing the game, that there's some significant reason that the control zones are tracked down and used, like an old tomb that has some sort of magical energy. It doesn't have to actually affect the game, but it's got some significance for a reason why people want to go and control that area. It doesn't have to tie into the background or anything, but just makes it a little bit more interesting. This one's got another one of those Games Workshop chunks in there. Chunks! A wargame terrain piece that they did in injection moulding for, I think, The Hobbit. And then what I've done is added, that's another Games Workshop sword. I added it to the side and sort of half covered it and surrounded it. And also I've got some little skulls and things, which I'll show you. What I have here, and we'll just reveal, is some really useful storage boxes which I put bits and pieces in. So bits of terrain, flags, animals, anything from food, candles, weapons, and skulls up in the top corner there. if I get those skulls out. So you can see, it's a classic kind of bits box thing really. I've got all sorts of different sprue mounted skulls and things in there. Pumpkins as well, I put them in the skull box. I didn't want an individual pumpkin box, but I guess with some of the new Warmachine, like the Grimkins, you could do with some pumpkins for bases and bits and pieces, because it kind of ties in with the Halloween-y type theme. Some more skulls, some of them caved in, which they tend to do when left out in the weather and slowly weather away. So yeah, I keep all these bits and pieces in there just to make it handy. When I'm building terrain, I just grab at things. Again, not because I'm not very, I don't plan very well, just get stuck in. Having everything to hand is great. So I have a set of chests up there, and I was going to put some chests, like a treasure chest in the middle, but then I thought that would look a bit poor, so I didn't bother. Went with what looks like an old battle, a famous battle scene perhaps, as an important control point on the board. Again, I've used some of those wooden pieces on that circular one. A small ram's head skull that'll look nice once dry brushed up. And that's it, most of it flat. And again, I had in mind that objective of not putting anything too obstructive on the layout, so the models could move freely completely over it, should you be using it as a control zone. Or if you wanted it, again, you could just put it down and say, oh, that area is rough terrain. So yeah, so what are the stages? Well, after I've done this, sort of gluing the pieces on, so glued on these large chunks of cork, glued on these pieces with hot glue, and then used the polyfiller to put it on there as well. The polyfiller is then lightly sanded down so that it sort of goes as flush as possible, and you lose the what looks like sort of knife edges and bits and pieces in there. And then also sort of glued on the little skulls and bits and pieces too. There goes that neighbour's dog howling again. It's the middle of the day and it's probably left alone. And you can see I've started to put some texture on this one, textured sand. To do that I'm using just standard fine grade sand, and that will provide the texture on top of the, and bring together the areas of cork and the areas of polyfiller. So you can see if I now replace this one with one that's finished earlier. Now this piece is completely done, as in I'm not going to load on any more terrain items, and it's about as complete as you can get. What do I mean complete as you can get? Well, it's done now. I'm not going to add any more bits. I'm not going to glue any more on. I've used some foreground pieces on here, which you can see in this little box. Oh, a scroll. So these are little tiles that foreground the MGF laser cut guys create for their terrain models. It came in the blasted tower, which is, you can see them integrated there. So that made it nice and easy to drop that on. I'll paint those up as well later. But they provided us a couple of spare sheets of that in the blasted tower, which is another terrain project I've been making. And I just kept hold of the spares, so drop them on there and make it look like there was an old tiled route to this layout. Again, you can see those Games Workshop pieces are going to look quite nice. I've tried to disguise some of the skulls to make it not too skull-like, but once it's dry brushed in, it'll look fine. You can see I put a tortoise there, which is inappropriate because you should have a sort of turtle, I guess, around water, but there's a reason why it could be around water. And a couple of toady type frogs. This will get the resin poured in water as a feature as well once it's done. And again, it will be flat so that models can move over it freely, but it will just look a bit of an interesting piece on there. So to get that sand on, I go straight on with the Mod Podge with a brush, straight over the surface, and then simply paint that glue on. then dust on with the spoon or sprinkle it. So I'll just sort of shake the spoon gently to allow that sand on, and I don't want it to be a big thick texture. It's only getting a very light dry brush, and then a lot of static grass and clumps and other details will go on top to disguise any more areas. Adding the cork on, which you can see I've taken cork and I've essentially done the classic breaking the edge up, and then I've glued it into areas on the board. So you can see it here and hidden underneath. It just again adds sort of unevenness, creates detail on the layout without making it impossible to move the models around. And you can layer this on as well, so you don't need just one layer of that. As you can see on this piece, which will now slide into view, there's some sections over here that I've got 2 layers of cork, and then I've built up with the polyfiller on there. And again, the polyfiller is good stuff, but if I really flexed this, it would pop off. It would start to crack. And one of the benefits of putting on the sand is that that does bond really well, which is great because you get a really solid bond. And I'm going to show you now how I seal this on. So this has been PVA'd and the sand sprinkled onto it, and it's had a couple of hours to dry, but it really needs to be cemented on now, otherwise you can still, I mean it's pretty well on, but I could rub it off. This Mod Podge is amazing stuff, but it's not really coming off. But to properly seal it, I'll show you what I do. So I'm just going to show you here how I'd go on and put the base sand on with neat Mod Podge. So essentially, use an old brush. Got these old artist brushes that I have sitting around, big old coarse thing there. Get a big old blob on the brush of the Mod Podge, which is white glue. I can see it's a bit dusty on there at the moment actually anyway, but I don't mind. I just paint on directly with the Mod Podge over the dust. In fact, what I did do is use a vacuum cleaner after the original textured items like these bits of cork and bits and pieces have been glued on and left for a good 12 hours. I did vacuum off the worst of the dust, but you do get a little bit of dust on there which you're going to sort of pick up as you put on this Mod Podge white glue. And a little tip about Mod Podge as the neighbour's dog howls away. There's loads of brands. I mean, Games Workshop do their own white glue for the miniatures. There's 1,000 different waterproof exterior brands you can pick up. But I've found with Mod Podge is that it doesn't react with anything, because I've done a big couple of terrain layouts in the past and used different varieties of white glue that have somehow reacted with the paint, and it could have been the paint. It could have been some emulsion or something I used rather than acrylics, and it could have been the glue, because I may have picked a sort of ultra strong wood glue and it may have had a chemical in there or something that reacted. It wasn't designed to take paint. But Mod Podge, it just works and it is really rock solid. So I've done a reasonable area there, and before it dries, so I'm going to put the brush into a pot of water so that it's usable again. I shall get my fine-grained sand, and I'm going to show you what the sand looks like. Sorry about the noise, by the way, but I'm in my garage, so I've got the whole of my neighbours shouting on a barbecue day. So I've got the sand here, and shake it on gently, just to make sure it goes all over that glue without being sort of dropped on in a massive lump. And the other thing is, because of my work surface here, I can just brush off the surplus afterwards and reuse it. So that's a section, that's a reasonable section done quite quickly on this sort of 12-inch diameter layout. To properly seal on this sand that's been put on with Mod Podge, which is just white glue, but it's good stuff, I use a combination of things. I use some isopropanol, it's basically massage alcohol, or rubbing alcohol, and the scenic glue. And the scenic glue is just 1 part Mod Podge and 3 parts water, and I put them in these small spray bottles. Now the importance of, one other thing is there's a tiny drop in this scenic glue spray that I've made of washing up liquid, and that allows the surface tension to break, and the glue can then seep into every corner without bubbling up. The alcohol also does that trick, because when you spray it on first, it's basically moistening everything to allow the glue to get around every tiny granule and give you the firmest possible finish. So to do that, with the dog howling, the neighbour's dog, oh, here's the isopropanol alcohol. You can buy it in all good sort of hardware stores. I'll zoom back out. Don't drink it, and I keep a load of it in this big bottle. Well, I didn't keep it in there, I just bought it like that. That's a bit random, so get the spray, stay back at a decent distance. I mean, it's going to go everywhere. Try and get my junk out of the way, so you can try and see what I'm doing. I'm going to find mist. You can see it is slowly wetting the piece up, but you don't want to, you want to find mist. Just to moisten everything without like massive running bits of wet on there. So that's that done, moistened up with the alcohol, and then straight on afterwards with the scenic glue. And similar, I'm just spraying it, and that's gone a bit thick, but you don't want it, see it again, oh, it's going a bit thick now. Now that is a problem. My scenic glue sprayer has ruined itself, so what I'm going to do is just try and get that back in focus. Swap the nozzle. I buy a load of these, but I'm going to swap the nozzle for the alcohol one. In fact, put the alcohol one back in, put the other one back into the alcohol, because that will just sort that out. And now I'm getting a fine spray. So I've now swapped the nozzle, and I'm getting a fine spray of the scenic glue now. And it is pooling up, and it is going everywhere. But there's a technique, so I'll whiz it around to make sure we're getting the glue around the back. That's it, completely covered. And then one of the things you want to do is use your tissue to get rid of the grab a bit of kitchen towel, tear it up a little bit, and you can wipe it off areas that you don't want too much on there. You can also use it to sort of dab on gently. You don't want a massive build-up of glue. It's not the end of the world to leave a bit of glue on top of those rocks and bits and pieces. And probably just go into these corners around there as well. That bloody annoying dog. I bet it's locked in. So that's it. Well, I guess I could go on the edge there a bit, get rid of some of that glue. I'm not too worried. So it makes a bit of a mess. I've got this cardboard down, but leave that now for a couple of hours and it will just be absolutely rock solid. Essentially what's happened with the alcohol going on first, it's allowed, it's moistened everything and allowed the scenic glue I've sprayed on to go into every nook and cranny and really seep down to the base, and giving you the absolutely most rock hard skin you can imagine of gravel and sand. So, you know, a piece that I've already done that on, move that one out of the way. Yeah, I've already done that on this guy, and it has really resulted in a very, very solid skin of glue, which both strengthens the cork generally, and just brings everything together neatly. In fact, the spray would have sprayed on to this resin piece in there and also on these sections, and they've kind of gone a very matte colour, and that means that they'll very easily then take paint, because essentially it's gone on as a kind of almost as an undercoat on the resin and these stone sections as well. So you can see I'm nearly done on this section now. I've put quite a lot of the fine sand on, and I've just done another section. I've layered on the sand, or layered on the Mod Podge glue, and I'm sprinkling with a spoon. You can see some sections here that are still white, and I basically missed a couple of parts. So you can see here, and I went back over, particularly where the border is between the cork and the polyfiller filling stuff, because it's a place where you're likely to get cracking. So putting a coating of the Mod Podge glue followed by sand really helps to prevent potential cracking in those areas. Although I think I mentioned before, it's not absolutely vital that you cover every area of the cork or the filler with the fine sand, because when you've done your static grass and your extra landscaping detail on top, it's going to cover up any remaining missing patches. I mean, and also the missing patches can work. I mean, there's a section here I haven't done. When that's painted, and there is a little bit of gravel that'll be on there once the scenic glue's been sprayed on, the result will be look like a very hard, dry patch of earth that's not got any kind of texture on it. So it's not a big deal if you miss. This section here looks like it needs some Mod Podge and some stuff on it though. As you can see here as well, I've exposed some of those wood pieces underneath, and I'll leave them open so they'll take a nice paint and dry brush, but I've covered some of them along the side there as well. And I will do those once they're done in a slightly different colour, a more woody looking colour than the rest of the board. This rock will stand out as well. It's not going to be left natural. I'll probably do it a stone grey to contrast with your traditional sort of muddy earthy look around the edge, and then more stone and some detail on the bits of skull. They'll just stand out nicely, but once there's some tufts and some static grass on, it'll blend the edges nicely. And I think you can see on this one now I've done the sand, although the white of the filling stuff is showing out, the polyfiller, which kind of gives it an unusual look. It is looking more integrated now, and you can see that it does look like a bit of a stone escarpment that's jutting out of the ground. with the gravel patches I've put on. So there you go, that's just another quick view. What are some other tips? Oh, another tip, when you're putting on the PVA, which I'll show, get a small blob of the PVA glue on the brush and just demonstrate. So I'm going to do here, and of course if I'm going to sort of do it like this, I'm almost painting it on. But when you're doing a large area, once it starts to get a little bit tacky, go back over and stipple it. And the reason for that is on these large flatter areas, if you don't stipple it, you get these sort of lines of heavier glue. And of course again that's going to all disappear when you've painted it, but if you want it completely smooth, stippling like this will prevent there being big clumps of glue and allow the sand to go on more evenly. And if you're doing a hole like I've been doing like about a quarter of this at a time, so that the glue doesn't dry completely before I've got the sand on. If you're doing about a quarter of it at a time, you can make sure that you're going back before it's dry and just stippling the glue again, which allows it to smooth on. The other thing, what will happen is sometimes you'll pick up some grit because you'll go back onto another section that's not completely dry. That's not a big deal. I just have a big tub of water beside me to rinse the brush in between use. So that's gone on there. I'll just do another bit of sprinkling from the spoon. And again, doesn't matter that it goes all over the area, because any minute now I'm going to shake it all off. I'm just going to pop this up, shake it back into my tub. I have a large plastic tub, and I won't video it, but essentially it means I can just pour all the stuff off the edge straight into the tub and reuse it at a later date. So where's the bit that was just done? Just here in front of us, so you can see I went on this edge here, onto the edge of that gravel. Some of it's gone over the gravel that's there before, which is fine. It's just going to be an interesting texture. And there's a section over there that I did as well. Move it that way. Yeah, I've just gone over the edge here. But again, there's some blank patches. That's not going to show when it's all painted. The white won't show. And I think I've probably put enough on now. I think that one's got enough gravel to look integrated without too many jarring areas. But again, different textures are good. I mean, that's a boulder that's smooth, and then the bit of cork there gives you a jagged edge that once that's painted and dry brushed, you'll get a nice contrast between a smooth boulder and a nice jagged area with some sort of broken up stone there as well. The whole thing sort of brings it together neatly. Just a quick tip about gravel, using the different grades means that it does give you a nice sort of integrated look. If you used all one size, it can look okay, but I've seen some very poorly done miniature bases, the sort of 28mm scale bases, where people have just used large gravel and nothing else, and the result can look just too chunky without any variation. So again, on the edge here, if I can get that to focus, we've got a blend of some bigger gravel pieces and then right down to the smaller, and then even here I've used little chunks of cork just to look like large bits. In fact, I'd argue that as a terrain piece this could have done with some hacks and chips out of it, but it's going to look fine. It's going to look fine when it's done. It'll take a nice dry brush and it would look worn out enough as a tomb. I think, is it called Dorin's tomb? Thorin? I don't know, one of the dwarfs with an Orin type name from the Mines of Moria set from Games Workshop is where that came from. And you can see this one, which we did not like long ago, about 10 minutes ago. the glue has sort of, there's no pooling of glue anymore, and it has started to dry. I can feel like on there it's completely dry. This won't be totally dry yet. And again, those stripes through there of the glue will disappear once it's all painted, and there's plenty of static grass clumps and things on there as well. So yeah, that's a tip. Use different materials, bit of old twig, rounded flattened boulders, and then gravelly pieces. The whole lot so then comes together with some variation. And also if you fill up the edge of some of these bits of stone that you put on, so I could have filled up to the edge of that, but I didn't. But if you do fill up to the edge like this one, when you paint the train, you can leave that as a grey or creamy coloured, buff coloured stone as a different colour to contrast with everything around it, and that will look quite natural because it's nicely integrated, like the turf's gone up around the side of it. Whereas these other boulders where they've got blank edges, when it's not up against the edge, that it's still fine, it'll dry brush up nicely. In fact, the interesting thing with this boulder right here is some of that gravel and sand has got up on the side of it. I'd usually try and avoid that, you know, sort of scratch it off, but this is where this Mod Podge glue is just incredible, because I noticed this in the last few weeks while I've been using Mod Podge. Here it is again, just to show you. It is rock hard, and the funny thing is I've used sort of stuff from a local hardware type store, which was designed for exterior super tough use, and I've never found one that dries quite as rock hard once it's got some sand in there. You just can't you can't get it off, which is a good sign for the overall terrain piece. Once all of that's dried and fully textured, you're just not going to lose that sand. And again, because this is a cork base, you can see underneath the cork, natural cork, gives it a little bit of flex when you drop it on terrain as well, so it will conform to a terrain piece whilst also being cork. Unlike MDF, it's not going to warp in your garage or take on moisture. So there we go, another bit of a rambling section.